Hello and welcome to another episode of the Looking After Nature podcast, bringing you close to nature and wildlife in Hampshire. My name is Andy Davidson, and I'm on here once again with my co-host, Carly Harrod. Hi, Carly.
Hi, Andy. I live in the city. I live in Southampton, but you live out in the countryside, don't you?
Yes, I'm in the middle of Downs. I'm surrounded by farmland, and it's what we're going to be discussing today, the farming.
Yeah, so humans have been farming in the UK for at least 6,500 years, and our farmland covers around 70% of the UK.
Because we've been farming and shaping our landscape around for centuries, many of the green spaces we look after were once grazed, and we continue to do this by conservation grazing. We are lucky today to be talking to Rob Groves, the Senior Farm Ranger at Manor Farm. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Andy.
Quite often the people we talk to have been here donkey's years, some of the people on the podcast, but you're quite new blood, aren't you, Rob?
I joined the service back in the autumn of 2019. So I've been here sort of 18 months now.
So where were you before you joined us?
I had spent a year working for Natural England, running their only in-hand farm within the whole country. And that was up on Salisbury Plain, looking after some really, really important short grass and national nature reserve that they have there, with some, with the oldest registered herd of English longhorns in the country.
And you're from a proper farming background as well, aren't you, I think?
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in North Gloucestershire, spent all of my childhood there, went to university, and didn't make my father very proud and went to do conservation at university. So he was wanting me to go into farming, and it wasn't really something I was interested in. Did conservation at university, a HND, which I was really, 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 really happy with. And as part of that, I did a year in employment, and I was really lucky enough to spend that time with the National Trust up on the Cotswolds with their conservation grazing team that they have there. So that's where my interest in conservation grazing started, really. I was really lucky to spend that 12 months with them, learning what they do, why they do it, and then sort of learning how I can apply that to my future. And then I was really lucky then to actually get a National Trust livestock ranger job. And that was for the South Downs team based near Midhurst. And I spent 8 years there, really sort of honing the conservation grazing that we were doing and all our in-hand livestock. So we had a real mixture of cattle, sheep and pigs on a mixture of sites as well. So I was managing lowland heathland, which is really important and really rare in the UK, downland, and a bit of lowland grassland and parkland as well. So that's sort of where I sort of cut my jib, I guess. And then I was really lucky, like I said before, to spend a year with Natural England, managing their in-hand farm there and getting to know sort of the history behind something like that. So the Natural England farm is, you could probably say, as parts of the National Nature Reserve haven't been touched by humans since the Stone Age. So since Stonehenge went up, which was actually only a mile away from the farm, and you can still see the ancient field markings. You can see that the ground hasn't been improved, and it was really just about using the longhorns to keep that system going and to keep that incredibly rare piece of grassland, which is reportedly one of the highest concentrations of burnt tip orchids in the UK. And I was lucky enough to see that in my first year there, and I have to say that was incredible. Like 30,000 spikes of these burnt tip orchids was incredible. So if anyone ever gets a chance, take a trip to Parsonage Down and you'll be amazed in May.
Yeah, so burnt tip orchids, they're quite rare, and they're also quite tiny as well, aren't they? They're only an inch or two high, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really susceptible to overgrazing. So that side shows how the using grazing lightly and all year round, but then also moving the animals around consistently means that you can consistently encourage the burnt tips, and that even through changes of management, they've still managed to keep the burnt tip orchids going, and you don't find them on many other sites in the UK.
We use the term conservation grazing a bit, but really, I mean, we need to make decisions between that and more intensive farming, because I mean, we talked about improved grassland, and some of you might think that's been improved for food production, isn't it?
Yes. So I think in its simplistic term, the difference between conservation grazing and regular farming, or what we might call intensive farming, is that intensive farming is primarily driven by food production and economy. So you're trying to maximize everything you can get out of that piece of land or that animal in order to produce the most food and the most profit for the farmer. Whereas conservation grazing is more about using livestock to enhance the natural environment. So on many of the systems I've worked on in the past, economics is not the driving force for why we were using the conservation grazers. We were using them in order to have the biodiversity increase. So it was about moving many of our unfavorable condition sites into favorable recovering sort of into that area, so that we were looking after that environment and ensuring that there is a place for nature. The other important thing about conservation grazing is about mimicking what humans have done in the past, because a lot of our natural, what we think as natural landscape, so Salisbury Plain or lowland heath, has only come about by traditional farming, subsistence farming. So especially for heathland, that really came about because it was land that was deemed not economically viable for the landowner. So he gave it over to the local villagers as commoners, and then they had the right to take various things. So they would take firewood, which would clear the site. They would then take bracken, which would then again clear the site some more, and then they would be able to graze various types of livestock. And that's what enabled the heathland to take effect. And for that specific and downland and other sites, by stopping doing those subsistence-based tasks, it's resulted in a loss of biodiversity. And so the conservation grazing is really a way of continuing on in a modern way what they were doing. So we can still look after these really, really important places, which are havens for specific wildlife and flora and fauna.
But also what you're doing is mimicking what the wild animals were doing back in the Stone Age, because you would have had, I mean, in Britain, we had woolly mammoths, wild ponies. There was a type of giant cow called an auroch. There was bison and all sorts of animals, which basically our farm animals have replaced, haven't they?
Yeah, so they have. And that's where sort of conservation grazing is moving into sort of new territory in this thing we call sort of holistic grazing, or a holistic approach to conservation grazing. And that is more to do with mimicking those large herbivores and looking at how large groups of herbivores, so specifically they've looked at wildebeest in the African plains, and they see that they don't stay on the same bit of grazing for more than a couple of days, and then they move on to a fresh bit, but they won't come back to that original piece of grazing for at least 3 months. And that is because the grasses take 3 months to regrow. So the animals have worked out their cycle of moving around, so they're always grazing on fresh grass. So that's what a lot of more detailed conservation grazing systems are looking at now. And that's something that sort of we did on the downland a few times, and it was about grazing concentrated amount of animals on a small spot for a short period, then moving on to fresh grazing, and then coming back to that area 3 months later, which was both encouraging the grass growth and the redevelopment of the soil, because that's really important as a soil structure. But also it was great for the invertebrates, because the fresh dung, every time you're moving, all of the insects were moving, and then they're obviously food for birds, and they're great pollinators. So when you sort of mash all that together, it is really mimicking what's going on in the wild, and we're just doing it on a smaller scale and on a scale that we can manage and see real good results from.
Because that's the one thing that actually you can't replace with artificial mowing or cutting, is that little elements like the dung they produce or the different types of grazing they do, isn't it?
Yeah, so like the dung especially, so it's about nutrient recycling. It depends on what your system you're going for. So if you want to just keep the nutrients as they are, so you're just about nutrient recycling. So you're breaking down those real complex grasses into dung, which then dung beetles can get to, which then also then seeps back into the soil, strengthening the soil structure, which is a real problem with intensive farming in the past. Is we've really, really harmed our soil structure, and that's a real big carbon sink. And also by harming our soil structure, we're allowing water to get into our river system really, really quick. So it's a it's helping with that as well. And you've got sort of like with sort of using mechanical, it has its place, especially if you're trying to remove nutrients. So for example, on a lot of hay meadows have come about because they're low nutrient, because they have had centuries of cutting and removing the grass, and you're not adding new nutrients. So that's allowed the wildflowers to proliferate, because coarse grasses, our modern grasses don't like low nutrient environments. So that allows all the wildflowers to come in, and again, all the pollinators and all the birds that go with that. So mechanical does have its place, but then the animals also help to create a mosaic of habitat. So farming often results in, well, modern intensive farming results in monocultures. So you normally get a field of ryegrass, or you get a field of pure wheat, or that kind of thing. And that's really bad for a wildlife, because that's not offering a particular variety for all the different species that rely on different niches. So by using livestock, we're creating more of a mosaic habitat. So you're creating areas of nice grasslands. We're using, say, cattle or sheep. Sheep will graze like really, really close to the ground, a real fine structure, but cows will create a more detailed edge. So you've got like a real nice structure between the grass moving into scrub and then moving into the woodland, which is great habitat for lots of different species. And then the cows as well, especially, they're great at creating lots of divots in the ground. So they will create lots of holes, which again, the vertebrates love. They'll create lots of areas where some standing water can stay. And that again is really encouraging and really great for invertebrates.
Yes, I mean, it's quite different in the way that different animals graze, because a sheep will, they sort of nibble close, don't they? And there's like a little fine lawn. But cows, they use their tongue, don't they, to wrap around and pull out as well as bite, I think, don't they?
Yeah, so we sort of term it as like selective and non-selective grazers, really. So cows, they have a very, very muscular tongue, and they use that to wrap around and rip the grass out by the roots. So often they're really good at coarse grasses. So if you've got an area, say, of downland that has got some really, really old ragged grass in, you can use your cows to be able to pull all that old grass out, and they will help rejuvenate it that way. Sheep, on the other hand, they have two sets of teeth, both the bottom and top, and they're nibblers. So they will nibble really, really tight to the ground. And the same with ponies, they will nibble really, really tight to the ground. The main difference is that with the selective and non-selective is that cows are relatively selective. They don't tend to eat wildflowers. They'll always go for the grasses first. So they're great on areas where you want to preserve your wildflowers, whereas sheep and ponies are notorious for nibbling every flower head off possible going. But they are great on down. Sheep are synonymous with downland because they graze the grass really, really tight. And then you've also got, you can add in like pigs. They're great conservation grazers if you're looking to turn over ground. We used to use them on heathland. So they're great at breaking up the rhizomes of both the bracken and the rhododendron. And once they've done the heavy ploughing, we'd then be able to reintroduce heather and grass species and then start the grazing again. And the same with goats. Goats will eat anything, especially trees and really woody stuff.
And it's that randomness with animals, isn't it? You don't get with, because I mean, if you go out with a mower, you tend to cut the same block. You don't leave odd little bits and bobs.
Yeah.
And it's that randomness of animals being just selective eating as well as just moving around, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like I said about the mosaic, is like just the moving around, they create loads of areas where they'll obviously always eat somewhere which is nice sweet grass, but then by them doing that, they're creating a few rank areas. And even in such a piece of short grassland, you can have various different habitats which are great for various different animals. So like by having long and short areas, it's offering the most for that piece of ground to the most amount of animals and plant species.
So we talked a lot about grass, but we're also talking about bushes. But there's a difference between grazing and browsing. What's the difference there?
So grazing is the animals eating grass specifically, and they're constantly eating it, whereas browsing is where they are picking at various other stuff. So they'll be picking at the sides of trees, they'll be picking at the sides of bushes. You've got something like a Herdwick sheep, which is a renowned browser. So they will happily graze on scrubby stuff rather than grass. You've got like goats will happily graze on wood and that kind of stuff. Cows less so will graze on tree species. They will take new saplings, but they won't eat the barky bit, they'll just eat the leaves off. So by them browsing, is just they're not intensively grazing that area. They're picking at it and they're creating holes, they're creating areas where other species can get in.
So what animals do we use with our grazing?
In the Countryside Service, we primarily have cows and sheep. So we've got a real mixture at the moment, I think, but mostly centering on Highlands, about Galloways and a few Sussex grazing in the county. The Highlands are more centred on Staunton and the Portsmouth Waterground on Staunton Country Park. And the Belties are grazing on a few other little sites. We've got a large group of sheep, which are Clin and Romneys. Again, they're grazing on the chalk grass and mostly. So, like I said, like sheep are synonymous with grazing the downs. They're the result of, in the past, sheep grazers would have been grazing their sheep on the downs in the day. And then all of the drovers' tracks you see on the northern side of the downs are where they would take their sheep off at night and then take them down to the arable ground, and that would remove the nutrients from the downland. That's why the downland, we say downland is nutrient poor. It's because over hundreds of years, farmers have been grazing their sheep on the downs and then moving them down at night, and then they poo supposedly on the arable land. So I've read in the past that farmers in Sussex had managed to train their sheep not to poo in the day, that they had trained them to poo only at night. I don't know how believable that is, but I don't know if it's anecdotal, but I've read it. And we've got a big group of ponies as well grazing alongside sheep up on Butser Hill and over on Danebury Ironfort. Yeah. And also we got some heathland grazing up in the north of the county with some ponies as well.
So which ponies are we using there?
They're Exmoors. So they are on loan from the Exmoor Pony Society. So we do all the management and we look after them. And then if we ever decide that we no longer need the ponies, then they're sent back. The beauty about ponies is they require very little management from us. So we can simply turn them out and allow them to do what they want to do, really. They just go and graze, they look after themselves. We don't need to do any sort of physical manual work with them. Whereas with sheep and cattle, there is a lot of work that sometimes needs to go in with them. So catching them, treating them for various problems and that kind of thing. So ponies are less maintenance for us.
And some of the breeds you've mentioned, the belted Galloways and Highlands, I mean, they're all what are considered traditional breeds, aren't they? What's the benefit of using breeds like that?
So yeah, we call them native breeds. So they're breeds that have been bred in the UK. And if you think about a lot of our UK species, we might be a small island, but we have loads of different breeds, and all of those breeds have been bred for a specific function. Mostly they've been bred to deal with a specific geographical function. So South Downs sheep is synonymous with the South Downs because that's the sheep that they use to graze the grass. The Herdwick is synonymous with the Lake District because it was hardy. It could survive outside all year round. It didn't need to do anything. It get hefted as well, so it could graze on the mountainside. Then you've got like the belted Galloway they don't really know where the belt came from, but they're grazing up on the sort of the lowlands of Scotland, and they're great for that. So, and the Sussex as well was a draft animal, but is synonymous with the grazing of the Weald. So these animals are often bred for those specific areas, and we should be using those to our advantage because they can convert usually very, very low quality forage into great biodiversity gain, but also great high welfare, low input meat. And that's somewhere that conservation grazing is also heading into, is linking food production with the benefit that it can do to the natural environment.
We talked about the Exmoor ponies because, I mean, they're the closest thing we've got in Britain to one of the primitive wild ponies, isn't it? They're all pretty much the same colour, and they do look like a proper wild horse, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And you probably, if you went to Europe and saw some wild horses, they probably wouldn't be much too dissimilar to what you would see over there. So yeah, they have had very little sort of input and change. And the same with like a Herdwick, they have had very little change over hundreds of years since the Vikings brought them over. So there are breeds out there that haven't had much change at all. Like a belted Galloway hasn't changed since I think the 1600s when the belt was originally introduced to the Galloway herds, and that hasn't changed at all.
So is there any sort of particular favourites you have amongst the breeds or the animals you have at the moment?
I have a soft spot really for belted Galloways and Sussex cows. Belties I think are just great conservation graziers, but they are sassy, I guess. They're a little bit harder to manage. A lot of them still think they're grazing free on the Highlands, whereas they're not, and they can be a bit funny. So when I used to work for National Trust, we used to graze a large piece of common land near Liphook called Chapel Common, and that was a 350-acre piece of open heathland. And those girls would be out there for 6-7 months of the year. And if I turned up, so it would mostly me checking them every day. If I turned up with someone else on that day, they would be like, "Nah, you're doing something with us today," and they would run off into the other end of the heathland, into the woodland, and not want to be caught. So, or if they heard a rattling of a trailer, game over, and that kind of thing. But then I love a Sussex cow just because they're so quiet, they're docile, they're great at converting the down, and so they're my sort of two soft spot sort of cows I have. So yeah.
And they're very attractive little things. They're quite fluffy. They're little teddy bears, don't they, in some ways?
Yeah. Yeah. We used to have little volunteer groups checking them, and the little Facebook group for Chapel was sort of like the Guinness cows, and people would always be saying they're really easy to spot. So that's the other beauty with the Belty, is you can spot them from a mile away.
Yeah, I remember quite a few years ago, way before you started, one of the teams decided they're down on Hayling Island, and they had a site which basically was right on the coast. They decided Shetland cow was a nice breed to try. Now, Shetland cow, they're in the Shetland Islands, and they used to be and swam across to other islands rather than transported in boats. So they turned up with these cattle, and one of them immediately thought, "Okay, I'm going for a swim," and it swam out into the middle of Langston Harbour. And the staff are going, "What are we going to do now?" I think we had to get the Langston Harbour master to come and herd it back in again. And I think we got rid of them quite soon after that, because their ability to swim wasn't really taken into account when we put them next to Langston Harbour.
Yeah, I think that just shows that that you can take a cow or out of the Highlands, but it still wants to do that. Is that genetic inside them that's what they want to do, sort of thing. And like I know, like in Northern Ireland, they move their cows. They make them swim across one of the locks to get to the grazing that they get to, and they make sure the cows are showing the calves how to do it. So, and then that herd has always grazed that area, and that herd know where to graze. They know where not to graze. You know, these cows and animals especially are not stupid. They know how the grassing works. They know where to graze. They work it out themselves. So it's like, I'm really keen on using those animals to their full extent, and not just pushing them around, making them graze where you want them to graze. It's allowing them to show you where they want to graze, where the important parts are. And then sort of, if you need to focus them, you can then focus them.
So we clearly use a lot of grazing animals for very important reasons on our sites, and that might be the downlands of places like Danebury Hillfort or the New Forest Commons. What are some of the issues with them, people coming to those sites?
I think obviously there's the obvious problem of like dogs and people coming into contact with their livestock. Cows are really, really big, intimidating animals. And if you were to come across a big field of those, it can be really, really scary. Sheep are unfortunately a really nice chasing toy by dogs. So I think I've been quite lucky in the environments that I've worked in that the public have always understood that the grazing comes first, and the grazing is the management tool that we have decided to use to keep that special place that they love to walk in, to keep it special and to enhance it in the future. So it is a battle, but it's about getting that positivity message across to people. So it's just saying, look, we know the grazing's coming, we know it's difficult, but we try to minimize it and to offer you alternatives. So when we've grazed the South Downs before, we would block graze. So I would make sure the cattle were in a specific area, and then I would also make sure there were no footpaths or minimal footpaths going through that area. But I also made sure there was an alternative route for everyone. And I would also set up the next pen ready so that people knew where the cows were moving into and the sheep were moving into. So I think as land managers, we have a responsibility to really clearly communicate that message, that what we're doing isn't to annoy people, it's to make those special places more special. And then we also have the opportunity to say, well, by doing this and making this place special, we're also providing some really, really good quality meat into our food system, so which is better for us as well.
Yeah, it's quite a balancing act sometimes, because some people sometimes get concerned about particularly cows with horns. You know, there are stories where people have been attacked by cattle, but we're always quite careful about which animals we select to put on what land, isn't it? Particularly where we've got public access.
Yeah, so I'm quite rigorous. Anything that shows an ounce of aggression, it will not go out on site on any public site, not even a closed field with a footpath going through. We don't do anything like that. Every animal is assessed before it goes out. So we do it on like a 5-point scale. So we'll just check its docility and that kind of thing, and have we had any problems in the past and that kind of stuff. So we're quite rigorous in making sure, but I can't guarantee that every animal, because it's about the situation. So it's sort of a funny story is again on Chapel, I had a really panicked phone call one morning to say, I've just been chased by your cows. And so speaking to the lady, I was like, trying to find out what was going on. I was like, really sorry. And she sort of said she was calling for her dog that had gone running off. And it appears that I think the cows just thought that they were being called. So they weren't running over to be aggressive. They were running over thinking someone's calling us because they've got food. So it can be as simple as that, like just cross wires. But I know they are big animals, and they are really scary, because sometimes they're scary for me.
Yeah, because I know, particularly a place like the New Forest, there is a bit of an issue with people treating the ponies like almost like pet ponies when they're semi-wild, aren't they? And people feed them, and then the ponies associate the people with the feed, and then the horses start approaching the people, don't they?
Yeah. So again, it's like getting that message across, saying these are wild animals. Essentially, you need to treat them like wild animals and give them the respect they deserve. And by encouraging, say, a pony to come and eat from your hand, you're opening yourself up to maybe get bitten, to get kicked, and the animal then also loses its wild instincts a little bit. And especially for ponies, like then they will maybe stop grazing because they know they're going to get treats, and they know they're going to get food from elsewhere, from visitors and stuff. So we need to communicate that these are wild animals essentially, and we need to allow them to do what they need, that we've asked them to do. So
I mean, in the main, there isn't a lot of issues. I mean, occasionally you get small issues, let's say, with, some they thought they were being called for food. We get a few, probably, a few elements where dogs are allowed to chase sheep, and we've had lost animals because of that. But we're really quite careful where we put our animals, and we always try and work to educate people as well, don't we?
Yeah. So so I was really heavily involved with the Heathlands Reunited project, and part of that we jointly ran with them and the Wildlife Trust. We jointly ran something called Take the Lead, and also we did this event called Hairy Not Scary. So we allowed people, general public, to come to the farm, and then with their dogs. That was really important, that they came with their dogs. We had a dog behavioural lady there, and we talked about sort of responsible walking of dogs in the countryside. And then we then took the dogs and the owners in with the cows and the sheep. And I spoke about, like, this is how the cows react. This is what I would like you to do. This is what you should and shouldn't do. So it's little things like, if you walk into an area that's a footpath, a field that's a footpath, got cows in it, and you're not comfortable with walking through, 9 times out of 10, a farmer will be more than happy for you to walk around the edge of his field. If that's what makes you feel comfortable, then walk around the edge of his field with the dog on the lead. Or if you can see an alternative route, just take it. If you were to see a farmer and explain, I'm a bit scared, I didn't want to walk through your cows, then 9 times out of 10, they'll be more than happy to accommodate you walking differently. So that's what we always said at the Trust, was like, if you can find an alternative route, find the alternative route, but we will always do our best to not block footpaths. We will try to segregate footpaths from grazing blocks, so it was a sort of a two-way street, really. So, but I think the national park is still running those sort of courses. So if anyone's interested on going on, definitely just go on the national park's website and see when the next one's being offered.
So we've talked quite a bit about grazing animals, but what other things do farmers do to encourage wildlife in their other management they do on a site?
So a lot of farmers, especially on arable ground, they're encouraged to install wider field margins, winter stubble, headlands, pollinator strips. These are primarily to allow sort of to be wildlife havens for one, and wildlife corridors. So wildlife can freely move between different fields and different habitats, but also the pollinator strips and the beetle banks, and that are really, really important for pollinators in general. So they're providing a different pollination source for insects and stuff. So here at Manor, we put in sunflowers, and that is great for bees. But then by encouraging the bees to the sunflowers, we're also encouraging them to our arable crops as well. So we're trying to encourage sort of as much cross-pollination from as many different species as possible. And then winter stubble is really, really important for winter overwintering birds. And then also it's really important for a lot of farmers to be sort of not leaving bare ground over winter. So they're encouraged to either undercrop a group of wheat with, say, like with stubble turnips or something like that, or they're encouraged to plough and put in winter crops as quickly as possible, and to try and avoid having bare soil, because that's the worst thing, is that having bare soil in the winter, it rains really, really heavy, and all your soil disappears down into the river. And one, that clogs up the river and all the drains, causing flooding. But two, you have just lost all of your nutrients that you've been putting into that ground for however many years. You've literally just washed it down the drain. So you have to start again. And we were a sandy soil base, and we had a really bad farmer, and there were gullies deep enough you could hide a Land Rover in. That's how bad soil erosion can be, and that is really, really bad management. So like we managed to change the system, and they said, like, let's put this, all these are at-risk fields, and next to the river, let's make sure they're always grass, or they're always cropped, but you're not putting high-risk crops in, say like maize, which is really nutrient intensive, but also is a late cropping season. So most of the time on wet soil, if you get your maize out, you haven't got time to put your next crop in. So we were sort of just trying to work with our tenant farmers to think more broadly, and to think about what crop they were putting in next, and how that crop can impact on the wider environment. Because the last thing that we wanted for the heathland was for the soil from the next door field to come wash onto the heathland. It would put the whole low nutrient system back a couple of decades.
So at Manor Farm itself, you've mentioned some of the work you do. What else do you do at Manor Farm itself to encourage wildlife?
So obviously, unfortunately, we're closed like many other businesses at the minute, but we're taking the opportunity to make some real good, deep changes to the farm, and to especially put in some more wildlife friendly areas. So a Wednesday conservation volunteer group, they have kindly made us a load of bird, owl and bat boxes. They will be going up hopefully tomorrow. I'll be popping them up ready for the spring. We've put in a couple of wildflower strips inside the pay zone. So if you come and visit, you'll see that on a couple of the tracks, we've narrowed them slightly. And then on the side, we then put in some real still wildflower strips. We're planning to convert some of the fields outside of the pay zone that we use as backup grazing and hay production. We're planning this year to turn that into more traditional hay meadows. So we're going to re-plough that, return the nutrients to the soil, and then we're going to reseed it with some local provenance hay meadow seeds, and really turn that into a nice nutrient poor hay meadow in the future. And then we've also been putting in quite a few new ponds as a twofold, one for all the extra sort of the extra habitat offers for all of our invertebrates and wildfowl and stuff like that, but also as a way of capturing some of the water that we get on the farm, because it's really wet, and it's really wet at the minute. So we're hoping that we can funnel some of that water off of our farmland and into those ponds, and then stop it going into the Hamble so quickly, and hopefully do our part to increase the biodiversity of the Hamble.
Well, that's been fascinating, Rob, and hopefully we can all get out and actually start enjoying some of this again once we get past this current lockdown, and I can come out and see you on site. Yeah,
that'd be really good. And obviously, hopefully lockdown can end soon, but we're coming up to like lambing. So we've got lambing already prepped and ready to go in March. The play barn is ready to go as well. So Manor has really taken the opportunity to enhance itself and to make a much better offering for everyone from when everyone can revisit.
Fantastic. Hope to see you soon.
You soon.
So that was really good hearing what Rob has to say about our farmland. And it's really easy for us to access farmland with the miles and miles of rights of way we have here in Hampshire. But you have to remember that when crossing farmland, you are on somebody else's land, and you must respect that by not letting your dogs run through the crops, staying on the line of the path, even if it's muddy, and always remembering to take your litter home.
Yeah, and I think it's increasingly important these days as well, because we know more people are getting out in the countryside. But it's all about following the countryside code and ensuring you know what to do where when you're out and about and exploring.
I have a fun fact about farming, Andy. Do you want to hear it?
Well, you know we always enjoy these fun facts.
So, did you know that farms produce over 5.5 million tonnes of potatoes each year?
That is a lot of potatoes. I'll have to think about that when I'm boiling up my new potatoes for dinner tonight.
Yeah, well, it's enough to cover 120,000 football pitches.
That is a lot, isn't it?
That is a lot.
Well, thanks for tuning in. I hopefully you enjoyed that.
And remember, we'd love to hear from you with any comments or thoughts, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can let us know through our social media pages.
And we'd really appreciate it if you rate and review our podcast on iTunes, as this helps other people find us. For now, thanks again for listening. I'm Andy Davidson.
And I'm Carly Howard. See you next time.